Bonjour tout le monde. Welcome everyone to today's segment on professionalism, inclusion, and me. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I am here on the traditional unceded territory of the Abeguat Mi'kmaq First Nation. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with that, that's in Prince Edward Island. Certaines d'entre vous viennent peut-être de diverses régions du pays et je vous encourage donc à prendre un moment pour reconnaître le territoire que vous occupez. As we move through today's session, please share your comments in the chat space and questions by using the Q&A button in the language of your choice. You can vote for the questions you like by clicking on the thumbs up button, and I think we're going to have a pretty robust discussion, but hopefully we can answer most of the questions you share with us today. Donc, premièrement, j'aimerais brièvement me présenter à vous. I'm a settler, as I mentioned, on the Abeguat Mi'kmaq First Nation. My pronouns are he, him, il. And my first post with the Federal Public Service was in France, where I supported the commemorative work of Canadian War Memorials in Europe with Veterans Affairs Canada. Upon returning back home, I had the opportunity to work with a team at the Privy Council Office and Canadian Heritage, where we supported the work of the Prime Minister's Youth Council. Aujourd'hui, je travaille au Conseil Trésor avec le bureau responsable pour l'accessibilité pour la fonction publique. And I am someone who's very passionate about public service renewal, and I think the potential we have for it and harnessing the diversity of people across Canada and hopefully that helps us to realize our full potential. So I'm thrilled to be here with you and be your moderator and listen to what our fantastic panelists have to say. One of them is Mohammed, who goes by Ali, and Ali Khan is the Diversity and Inclusion Lead with the Federal Youth Network at Indigenous Services Canada. He's also a co-founder of the Anti-Racism Ambassadors Network. Ali maintains the career development webpage, so it's career development in the public service. And this provides resources on mentorship, networking, and informal learning network for public servants across departments and levels to find project collaborators, mentors, as well as guest speakers. Ali enjoys supporting employee-driven networks across the Government of Canada, particularly those with a focus on career development and health and wellness. Deuxièmement, nous avons Amanda Bernardo et avec ses pronoms she, her, elle. Amanda est la directrice intérimaire de l'équipe de gestion du changement et de conception des services au sein de Services Partagés Canada, où elle est chargée de soutenir l'avancement des efforts de transformation de SSC. Amanda est une fonctionnaire polyvalente, reconnue pour son professionnalisme, sa ténacité et sa capacité à obtenir des résultats. Jusqu'à présent, sa carrière au sein du gouvernement du Canada a été largement axée sur les politiques publiques et la gestion de projets, la gestion du changement, la transformation et l'engagement. Et finalement, lastly but not least, Susan Johnston, pronoun she, her, elle. Susan is part of the free agent program currently based on the priorities and planning team at Treasury Board of Canada's Secretariat. She also serves as an associate faculty member at the Canada School of Public Service. She's passionate about dialogue and collaboration and about how we as public servants can both work better together as well as across jurisdictions and with partners in other sectors of society. You can find Susan on Twitter at Joy Curiosity. I love that handle. Or tune into CKCU 93.1 FM early on Friday mornings to hear more from Susan. Donc, let's take a second to review some of our learning objectives today for this segment. And so firstly, it's to identify behaviors of professionalism versus whole self, acknowledge the risks associated with over or under sharing our personal personas. Here they are on the screen for us. Et finalement, créer consciemment leurs propres limites pour le partage sur le lieu de travail. Donc, ça, c'est nos objectifs d'apprentissage aujourd'hui. Et donc, afin de discuter du sujet et atteindre nos objectifs d'apprentissage, j'invite nos panélistes à nous offrir une petite présentation à tour de rôle. Donc, we'll begin with our first panelist letting us know a little bit of the topic we anticipate discussing today. And I'll pass it over to Ali.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate being here today. I'm recovering from a cold, and so I might be coughing and sneezing here and there, but I'll be with you throughout the presentation. My name is Ali Khan, pronouns are he and him, and I'm a co-founder of the Anti-Racism Ambassadors Network, currently working at Indigenous Services Canada. I am located in Toronto, the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. And I just wanted to start today off by, sorry, Marc-Andre, if you have this slide up, we're on slide number 2. Marc-Andre is to help me with the PowerPoint presentation. So today, let me just lead with reading some names. Roberta Drury, Marcus Morrison, Andre McNeil, Aaron Salter, Geraldine Talley, Celestine Cheney, Hayward Patterson, Catherine Massey, Pearl Young, and Ruth Whitfield. These were the individuals who were killed in an act of white supremacy a couple of weekends ago. And I could tell you in talking to my colleagues who are Black, hardly any of them had anybody reach out to them during this event. We may have diversity, in some levels in our comms teams, but we're not there yet. We have a psychological safe work environment where people can kind of let their leaders know that these issues are important and that when these acts of violence happen to people who look just like us, just like our colleagues, that we as an institution should be speaking out. So for that, I thought we would lead with this. And I'm very cognizant of the fact that, tomorrow is going to be the 2nd anniversary of George Floyd. And I know all the departments and agencies are sending, all these letters about all the town halls that they're hosting and all the work they're doing and how woke they are. But we're not seeing it reflected in action. So I remind all departments and agencies, when these acts of violence happen, speak out. And I encourage public servants, reach out to your colleagues and make sure people are okay, because we're still in the same position that we were 2 years ago when George Floyd was murdered, and there wasn't much reaction from us as public servants, and that needs to change. Next slide, please. I'm also cognizant of the fact that it is the 1-year anniversary of the announcement of the remains of 215 people that were found in Kamloops Residential School. This is, again, another painful reminder of the the discrimination that we have and that what we've carried forward as public servants, what we've done to people who are Indigenous, who are First Nation and Métis. And I think it's paramount that we as an institution move beyond acknowledging just our ancestral homes and move towards decolonizing our workplaces, our mindsets, and our policies. And I encourage everybody, please, to listen to these very important words from Murray Sinclair from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I'll just say this really quickly. He said, I want people to understand that even those who support doing away with racism, those who believe that racism is bad, they themselves are caught up in a system that almost forces them to continue to adhere to policies and beliefs that they don't understand. It comes from a history of racism, and until we address that and we learn from it, we can't begin to fix it. And next slide, please. The reason I bring up these examples is that violence happens in these systems in which whiteness is centered, but these systems do not always beget physical violence. They also cause institutional harm, and that's what we're here to talk about today. Professionalism. The standards of professionalism in the workplace are systemic. They are an institutionalized centering of whiteness, of able-bodiedness, of cisgenderedness, and they are ingrained in our culture to a point where we don't even see it. But I ask everybody here to introspect and, ask yourselves, who created professionalism? Who created this idea of professionalism? Who does it benefit? I ask you to look at your leaders, look at your deputy ministers, your assistant deputy ministers, your director generals, your directors. Who do you see there and who do you not see there? How many different ways of talking at work do you see as being acceptable? What about different ways of dressing? What about different ways of wearing your hair? What is considered appropriate and what is not considered appropriate in our workplaces? I think it's time for us to challenge these assumptions throughout all of our institutions. Professionalism tends to center whiteness as both normal and superior to other groups, and to other ethnic groups, to other regional, national identities, and to other customs. It affects our hiring. And I'll speak a little briefly about the psychology. There's something called implicit bias, the automatic or unconscious association of people make based on discriminatory stereotypes. There's affinity bias, or a tendency to warm up to people that look like them, that are from their similar backgrounds. These biases, they other non-white people, and we see it when we look at the makeup of our organizations. We see it very clearly, in fact. People tend to like people that look like them, and when hiring boards are there and they're interviewing people, we see these things result in workplaces that are entirely homogenous from the middle all the way to the top. The evidence is clearly overwhelming, and you can see it before your eyes. You just have to look at your org charts. We look at the way people's names are. Is your name Western enough? In Canada, they've done studies where people with Indian, Pakistani, or Chinese names were 28% less likely to get called for an interview. There's so many studies related to names. There's studies related to accents and how they affect people's ability to progress in our institutions. So these ideas are so ingrained in our society that when we look at people who are disabled, people who are from the 2S LGBTQIA+ community, when they go to interviews and board processes, it's hard for people in the hiring board to see past the way they look or the way they behave. And again, this is reflected in all of our institutions. Therefore, I think our ideas of professionalism should be challenged at every single step. They're centered across one type of person, and they don't hold any real value to the type of work an employee can actually do in the public service. I hope we take a deep look at professionalism and what it is, and see it for something that hasn't worked for all of us, for all of our colleagues in the public service. This is all about decolonizing the way we think and behave in the government, and seeing beyond the facade of professionalism. When we talk about what is normal, when we talk about what is professional, we're causing incredible harm to groups that have been historically disadvantaged. Neurodiverse people, Indigenous people, Black and racialized people, and so many of us have been denied the luxury of being considered professional simply because who they are. Professionalism should not be defined by how you look or how you dress or how you wear your hair. There's study after study that show the psychological and physiological impacts of code switching on marginalized people who have to fit a certain way who have to appear a certain way in their workplaces in order to move up. They have to look professional. We need a new definition of professionalism in the public service that places more emphasis on being true to yourself rather than how you dress and how you speak. We need to open up ourselves to other ways of thinking that embraces other cultures as being equally valid to ours. We need to look to incorporate Indigenous ways of thinking in the way we operate. We also need an emphasis on supporting people who speak truth to power, rather than asking people to continuously be tactful and diplomatic, because the old way is no longer sustainable. Again, if you need evidence of this, just look across all of your departments and agencies. Look at HR, look at finance. Do you see disabled people? Do you see Indigenous people? Do you see Black people represented in these institutions? Is there not, like, do we still need evidence to support these ideas? That we need to do a lot more to combat the professionalism and the centering of whiteness in our institutions. Sorry, I just want to go back to the previous slide, Marc-Andre, if you don't mind. These are some pictures from Google. If you Google professionalism, this is what comes up. And you can see who's in these pictures, who's represented there, and who isn't represented there. And I just want to leave that with people. And moving up to the next slide. So just some comments for public servants. Don't spend the next 20 or 30 years of your career trying to be professional. Try to be well-liked, and not speak up for the many injustices and inequities we continue to see in our institutions. Speak truth to power, shake the system, be active in your workplaces, and you don't have to do it alone. Join networks. There's a lot of great groups out there that are pushing for change actively. We work in strict hierarchies, and we know that the folks at the top are the ones that kind of define our culture and our workplaces, and they're also very centered in the future of work conversations that we continue to have. And again, we continue to see who is included in these conversations and who isn't included. So don't take pride as being someone who spent their whole career not rocking the boat, not questioning why the next appointment of the new director is again somebody who's not from a marginalized community. Be active, speak out, speak up for people who are from marginalized communities. Rock the boat, don't be passive observers. There's so much inequity that we have that we just continue to accept because we breed people, continue to promote people that are not challenging the system, that are yes men and yes women, that are people that we would like to have a beer with, or people that look like they came from the same community as we did. But what we need to do is we need to support people who have moral courage to speak out and to challenge a lot of the inequities we have in the GC. And you know what, I want to give a quick shout out here to the people who are doing this work, the people in EDI, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, the people in GC Digital, the people that are talking about future of work, who are being vocal about the needs of their colleagues that are underrepresented in these conversations. And people who are trying to maintain some of the incredible gains we've made over the last 2 years. It is not easy to challenge a system that is reinforced by a strict hierarchy. And so for the people who are doing this work, we see you, we support you, and we ask you to continue going. History is ripe with examples of people who were considered professional but led toxic teams. So we need to move beyond the systemically imposed ideas of professionalism that seem to support only one type of people and one type of thinking, and embrace individuality, embrace inclusivity, and create a better public service where we are all part of the conversation. I'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ali. We're going to move over to our next panelist to provide us with a presentation. So Amanda, if you'd like to pick up on rocking the boat and Ali's wonderful presentation today, we'll pass it over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Dana. Before I get my slides on screen, I just wanted to introduce myself again. So my name is Amanda Bernardo. I mark actually 8 years and 2 days with the Government of Canada. I'm joining from the unceded territories of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people in Ottawa. And I've had quite the career in the government so far. I like to rock the boat, I would say. And I think we have almost a duty to rock the boat. Like, that's why many of us become public servants, because we want to serve Canadians, and part of our job is to be able to give the best advice forward. And that doesn't mean to give what people want to hear, it's giving them what they need to hear. And that can sometimes be very challenging and hard to articulate, but it's part of our roles of public servants. So definitely keep that in mind. I started my career at Parks Canada in cabinet and legislative affairs, eventually moved over to TBS and economic sector, and then started to make my way into the GC digital community, working for the Chief Information Officer to help launch Next Gen HR Pay, moving to the school to help launch the Digital Academy, moving to public health to launch the ArriveCAN mobile application during the height of the pandemic, and I currently find myself with Shared Services Canada. So not only do I say is it good to rock the boat, but it's also good to change the boat. I know some people get very comfortable in their departments and in their careers, but it's really good to diversify your experience because that helps you bring new perspectives and new ideas to the different organizations that you may work with. So today my presentation is really all about talking about bringing your whole self to work. And what does that look like in a virtual context or in person? And for those of you that follow me on Twitter, I love Twitter. I always talk about Twitter. I feel like a broken record. I feel like I deserve a blue check for how much I talk about Twitter. But I'll also talk about social media and how that comes into play, especially given some of the talks I do around building a personal brand on social media as well. So next slide, please. So when I got asked to be part of this panel, we were talking behind the scenes about like, what does it mean to be professional and to bring yourself to work in a virtual context or in person? And to me, truthfully, there is no difference. Whether you are bringing yourself to, your room across the hall to connect remotely, or if you're heading into the office, people should be getting, the same version of yourself. And I think people, that's what they're looking for. They're looking to see some, connectivity, for lack of a better word, of what they're seeing from you online, what they're hearing about, how they interact with you in person or virtually. So it's really important when we talk about, bringing your whole self or building your personal brand, that we're not trying to build something fake here. Like, we're really trying to demonstrate your authentic self and who you are in all these different atmospheres. So for me, there's no difference, but there's a few key tips that I did want to share. And so obviously, number one, being authentic. So the foundation of bringing your whole self to work is authenticity, which is about showing up honestly, without self-righteousness, and with vulnerability. And what I mean by vulnerability is, especially as I've grown in my own personal career, I think it's sometimes rare to see that vulnerability in leadership, and that is so important. And so we want to see your whole self. That means, if you're having a bad day or things aren't going right, like, it's okay to admit, like, hey, this isn't working well. Me personally, I talk openly about my mental health. I have anxiety. There are days where I'm like, hey guys, it's just one of those days, like, things aren't hitting my brain right, or this is what I'm going through. Or you'll see me tweet about it of like, this is what I'm experiencing in my life. People know my story on trying to chase motherhood and becoming a mother. And, for a lot of women, like, showing that vulnerable side about that journey towards motherhood, like, most women that I know don't really talk about that, or didn't talk about that in the past, because it's like, oh, well, we're at work, we need to focus on being an employee. And if they knew about us trying to get pregnant, like, would the same promotions or opportunities be presented to ourselves? And I think nowadays that vulnerability just reminds people that you're human. Like, you're not a bot. You're not just this static person that will become a yes man or yes woman. It's that you're bringing that perspective and experience that makes you so unique. That's why people hire you to begin with. So that authenticity is so, so important. The other tip that I wanted to share was to be self-aware. So that ability to focus on yourself and how your actions, your thoughts or emotions do or don't align with your internal standards. For me, this is something, that really digs deep. Not that it's gotten me in trouble a few times, but I definitely stick to my guns on this. And so when we talk about being self-aware with your own internal standards, we obviously all follow, the values and ethics of the government of Canada. But there's certain personal standards that we kind of expect, with people too. Like, for example, I expect basic respect from people. So I don't think I'm asking for a lot, but it's something that oddly you may not encounter in all of your positions, regretfully, or experiences. And so for me, if there's certain things that I don't see or that don't sit well with me, that's where I'll rock the boat. That's where I'll push back and say, like, that's unacceptable, or I don't feel comfortable doing that, or this doesn't really align to who I am. Or potentially I'll just change jobs because, at the end of the day, I want to make sure that the people I work for, the mandates I support, the organizations I'm working with do align to my internal standards. And then likewise, that I'm able to live my whole self and present my whole self at work without fear of reprisal or regret. There's a lot of teams that I've spoken to in the past when we talk about mental health that they feel that they can't open up about their mental health in the workplace. If I was working in a team like that, I would leave. I would feel very uncomfortable not being able to openly express if I'm having a bad day or just things aren't sitting right, because I'd fear that my team would, or management would, think differently of me. So that's what we mean by those internal standards and how those should really set the anchor of where you kind of go in your career. The other part is not only being self-aware, but being socially aware. So this deals with the ability to take the perspective of and empathize with others, including those from diverse backgrounds and cultures. And I think this is really ties in nicely to Ali's presentation and what we truly mean by diversity and inclusion. So it's not just about, you know, as a hiring manager, hiring people that don't look like you necessarily. You know, we can all go out and hire people that don't look like us. But then if they're there and you're not doing anything with their perspective, you're not giving them a seat at the table, you're not giving them a voice, you're not giving them a chance to share your opinion, you're not trying to understand what they're going through. You know, take all the devastating events that happen, you know, just sending a note to say like, hey, is everything okay? Well, if it's not okay, if that's the response you got, how are you going to then take that in and try to support your team in return? So it's really about trying to empathize with those around you so that you yourself can grow in your perspective and experiences as well. And lastly, the one tip, there's a lot of things I could have put here, but the other thing I put was avoid unloading. And so I am obsessed with Brene Brown. If anyone follows my reading that I share publicly on Twitter, I love her book. She's fantastic. But she says share only if there are boundaries and they serve a purpose in a professional setting. So when we talk about being professional and bringing our whole selves to work, there's a difference perhaps of what I would share with my husband or my best friend versus what I might share with my colleague. And so she said, are you sharing your emotions and your experiences to move your work, connection, or relationship forward? Or are you working your, I won't say that word, with somebody? Work is not a place to do that. And so, you know, I've been in teams where there can be venting and there can be frustration and there can be that office banter or gossip or whatever the case may be. And really when we talk about unloading, we want to be able to share how we're feeling and share what we're going through, but we also want to make sure that we're not just, you know, venting at work or trying to like distort, you know, the reality of what we're experiencing with someone else, or we got in a fight with someone at the office. Like there's a certain professional way we can deal that. We can talk to our manager and say, look, this is what I'm experiencing, versus I have a conflict with an employee and then I go tell all the other employees like, oh, I can't stand this person makes me miserable, blah, 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 blah. There's a certain way that we should try to deal with that so that we're having these conversations in a bit of a professional manner. And the reason I say that as well is because sometimes offloading or unloading, it may feel like you're potentially trying to harm the reputation or, you know, experience of another employee. But in turn, it can also jeopardize your own reputation within your organization and with your colleagues. So there's a fine balance of how we should deal with conflict versus how we should share kind of our own experiences and vulnerabilities. So those are just a few tips. Next slide, please. I wanted to share a few examples from my own life to how I can put these into action. And if you have any examples that you would like to share, please drop ideas in the chat or ask a question related to this. So next slide, please. So a few of my examples are of how we can put these tips into action. So one is leading by example. So demonstrating through your actions that you practice the same values and behavior you expect from your team. So there's an old saying, and I'm going to not say this proper. I'm really bad with expressions. If you ever hear me try to do it, because I grew up in an Italian household, so Italian was my first language. But I think the expression is do unto others as others would do unto you. I think I'm seeing Susan nod, so I think I'm saying it correctly. But that leading by example, you know, if you expect people to respect you, it's showing that respect. If you want to have your voice heard at a table, it's ensuring that you give others the opportunities to have a voice at the table. If you expect people to be vulnerable with you, it's opening up and being vulnerable with them. So really leading by example. And it's interesting, I've been doing a lot of studies as I've kind of been working in the change management space. And through the organization being first, they talk about this commitment required from leadership. And when we talk about this commitment for change, we often hear people say we need buy-in. We need buy-in from our leaders. We need buy-in from our colleagues and from our ambassadors and whoever. But truly what you need, it's not necessarily buy-in, it's alignment. And what alignment means truly is leading by example. It's when your actions can match what you're saying. And to be able to do that, not necessarily just in a change, but even just how you hold yourself at work and with your colleagues and your peers, that is really super important. So I do try my best to lead by example. I know it's not always easy, but it's really important, I think. And I think just building my team and just my experience in government, it's something that I feel has set me apart, because you really get the same Amanda wherever you go. And that has followed me in my career and served me well. The other example I've shared is monitoring my emotions. So it's not always to control our emotion in any setting, but it's important to consider what effect our reactions or lack thereof will have on the perceptions of others. So for me, for example, there have been times, and this is kind of getting into the sphere of like how we be professional as well as being ourselves. But there are times when I've been in settings where people have clearly disrespected me in a meeting or just been very rude. I regrettably have experienced workplace harassment in the office, and there were times I've been sitting there and wanted to break down in tears. And I was just like, how am I going through this very early on in my career? Do I want to be in the government of Canada? And I had to kind of, swallow that because I was kind of scared at the time of like how to show my reaction. And even moving forward in my career, I've experienced times where I've experienced ageism. Like I'm pretty young. And if I introduce myself as a manager or an acting director, I can sometimes get these looks, or people that report to me are kind of unsettled a little bit because they're, older than I am and I'm younger than them. And I've had, comments like, baby manager or baby director. And that, hurts sometimes. But I do try to, be professional and not necessarily show in the workplace that is affecting me, because for me, it also kind of goes with like, fake it till you make it, like just keep going through it. And hopefully, I'll believe that, these things are true and move forward, and then address it privately. So that way there is that professionalism that is still maintained. And then the last example is asking for others' opinions. So when we talk about being socially aware, you also have to create environments conducive to allowing you to receive the opinions of others. So keeping a pulse on your colleagues, listening to their feedback, and using it to inform your actions or thinking. So this can be done, for example, if you're a manager with exit interviews, with your monthly or weekly, however often you meet with your team, just pulse checks. How's everybody doing? How am I doing? Is this working? I know with the remote work, I introduced a lot of different tools and technologies, and I would ask the team, is this working? Do you like it? If it's not working, let me know. If you have other ideas, bring it to the table. Or even just in general settings, like having a conversation with folks to just say, what do you think? Was there anything you would change? Is there anything that's not working that you like? So that you can receive those feedback. Because sometimes, even if the door is open, people may not walk in because they may just be nervous or shy. So even just asking the question can go a really long way. Next slide, please. So obviously wanted to talk about Twitter and being professional online. And I get this question a lot of, how do we represent ourselves online when we talk about being professional and maintaining some type of line, if you will, in terms of what you may tweet about. So personally, I said, I don't have a line. I have one Twitter account. I know some people have like their professional Twitter account, and then they have another handle where, maybe they tweet out pictures of dogs or other random things. You'll see on my feed that some days I'll talk about future work, and then the other side, another day you may see the other side of me, which is a really great half-baked harvest recipe that I just happen to nail and take a fantastic photo of. So you really get my personal life and you get my professional life. I think the one key thing here that I often personally keep in mind is I tend to stay away from politics. Just because we are, given our positions and our role in government, we do need to remain unbiased. And so I do try not to necessarily get super involved in some of the political debates around election time. Just for my own personal preference, there are ways that you can still engage in these conversations. By all means, being a public servant doesn't mean that you can't have a voice in your municipal or provincial or federal elections, but I think it's a degree of professionalism that we need to think about a little bit more carefully in that space. Some people have in their bios things like views are my own. I think that's, you should just expect that. If you're tweeting it, it's probably your own view. I remember early on in my career, I had that in my profile and my bio, and I kind of dropped that over time, because at the end of the day, if it's coming from me, it's clearly of my view. There's a tweet that I previously shared about kind of what you should tweet about as a public servant. So obviously, if things are protected, if things are secret, you should, walk a degree of caution in what you're sharing. You shouldn't necessarily be sharing that. Around certain periods, again, with elections, you're not necessarily talking about work or things like that, because sometimes there's a blackout. So different things like that, but you can certainly be open to sharing what you're working on, what you're researching, what communities you're involved with, what networks you're attending, what great Fin learning you participated in, like this one. And if you wanted to tweet the next day about something personal, I think that's totally okay. And for me, it's really refreshing, especially following colleagues like Susan or Ali or other people in the government, to see the different things they're talking about, because now we're so remote from one another that oftentimes in the office, it can feel like all we talk about is work and deliverables. So it's nice to see some of that banter of just regular life online, or even in a meeting, to just say, how are you, what's going on, outside of speaking about work. But yes, you can take a different line. Some people like to split it. Some like to keep it all as one. Like I said, take the approach of my whole self. You get it on every platform you meet me, whether it's at a speaking engagement, at work, in person, or my social media. That's my personal preference, but you can obviously do what works best for you. Next slide, please. So one more slide. I think I have one more after this. So here I just wanted to talk a little bit about the pros and cons of blurring the lines. And so some people may say that, being vulnerable or oversharing, or, not just talking about work in the workplace, can create cons, whereas other people will advocate that it actually can, create plus or pros. So for me, those pros include establishing trust. Building my own team, I can see how breaking down some of those barriers and just having normal conversations with folks can create those trusting relationships. And so when you bring your whole self to work, you're able to get to know colleagues better and create that familiarity, which leads to greater trust in your team. It also, again, just starts to eliminate that robot feeling, especially working remote, that we're just here to work. At the end of the day, we are humans. I work in change, so I focus on the people side of change. And it's really important to be able to bring your whole self to work, to be able to connect on a different level beyond just your mandate and your deliverables. The other thing that I love about blurring the lines is improved engagement and retention. So most people nowadays aren't necessarily chasing mandates or portfolios, but rather people and leadership styles. So bringing your whole self to work allows others to do the same. I know for me, in the last little bit of my career, I feel like I'm interviewing people when I'm being interviewed, because I'm really trying to get a sense of who are you, what is your management style, what is your team like. It's not necessarily about the work. I feel like you can work anywhere in the government of Canada. There's so many opportunities, but really you want to know the people. And so you see a lot of public servants who actually remain with folks, with leaders throughout their career, because they've established that connection and that rapport and that trust. For me, I just hired a bunch of people, and they feel like they know me already because of the reputation and how I built my online presence. And that's fantastic, because it makes my job hiring a lot easier. I don't have to sell it as much, just because people know the type of leader I am and what they would expect in working in a team with me. So that's always a really great thing. The only con that I put here was boundaries. And so some employees and managers prefer boundaries to help them establish work-life separation. And it's important to acknowledge and recognize this preference. So while I may be very comfortable opening up about my health or challenges I'm going through, or my colleague may be really excited to talk about her wedding or whatever the case may be, others may just prefer to keep that line. And so I think it's important to recognize what people's preferences are. I know also being a manager, I'm very friendly. I'm people's friends when they come into my team. But at the end of the day, there is a certain line that is also there in the background of knowing, at the end of the day, I'm your manager and there's certain expectations, et cetera. But at the end of the day, I'm also very open to having these, chats about Ozark and what was really good on Netflix this past weekend. So it's important to just recognize those differences. And just knowing that not everyone may feel comfortable, and to just know what that preference is and go from there. So that can be used to your advantage or to your disadvantage. It's just figuring out what works best for you and your team. I think this is my last slide. If I can go to the next one. Yes, it is. So I just wanted to end on a really great quote, and I can see a typo in my own slide. So it's Sheryl Sandberg, not Sherry, but bring your whole self to work. This is what she says in her quote. I don't believe we have a professional self Monday through Friday and a real self the rest of the time. It is all professional and all personal. And I really love this quote because for me personally, I think this is how I approach work and my life in general. You're getting all different facets of me. And that kind of creates that understanding of who I am as a person, what I'm going through life. I often refer to my team and my work as my work family. We see our coworkers sometimes more than we see our own relatives or close friends. We see them every week, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. And so having that rapport and that connection with them by bringing your whole self to work can make that experience really great, or it can make it really miserable. And I think that's why nowadays people are looking for teams where the people they work with are bringing their whole selves to work and that they feel comfortable to do the same. So I'll leave it there. I'll turn it back over to Dana. Thank you so much for having me again, and I look forward to all your questions.
Thanks, Amanda. Lots for us to digest. And I see someone commented how they loved your slides and your transition, so don't worry about the typo. Et peut-être juste pour récapituler un peu en français pour nos participants qui participent dans l'autre langue officielle, quelques points, il y avait beaucoup de choses que tu avais mentionnées, mais j'aime que tu aies repris ce qu'Ali a dit sur l'importance de faire bouger des choses, faire des vagues, rock the boat. Et comme Ali l'a dit, nous avons besoin de moins gens qui disent oui tout le temps. So less yes people. I think you both picked up on that, but at the same time, quand on veut comme challenger le statu quo, j'aime le fait que tu as mentionné comme soyez authentique, soyez conscient de vous-même, soyez socialement conscient, évitez de trop partager. Ça, c'est quelque chose qu'on va discuter ensemble aujourd'hui, et donc de partager uniquement peut-être s'il y a des limites et si cela sert un objectif dans un cadre professionnel. Donc, if it has something worth of added value to your professional life, then perhaps it's something to share. Mais à la fin, aussi Amanda, tu avais mentionné, c'est important de sentir moins comme un robot. Et je pense que c'est important de se souvenir de ça parce que de temps en temps, parce qu'on est tout seul chez nous, c'est facile de penser qu'on est juste vraiment une extension de nos ordinateurs. So I'm hoping Susan can perhaps pick up on those threads of feeling, less like a robot, but like a person, but at the same time, being professional and being yourself. There's a lot there, or maybe you'll go in an entirely different direction, Susan. So I'll pass the mic over to you, and I'll remind our participants. Donc, vous pouvez poser vos questions dans le Q&A. Et donc, we have a couple questions there that we'll get to shortly. And but as we continue the presentations, feel free to pop them in there and to vote for them. Donc, Susan, la parole est à toi.
Okay, merci Dana, et merci aussi Ali and Amanda. I learned so much while I'm talking there, and I'm still taking it in and digesting a lot of thinking and insight from our first conversations. I don't know if I can parallel that, but I'm happy to share what I've got. Today is my first day back to work after a longer creative pause. So no slides, but a couple of thoughts. What you're seeing behind me is the Ottawa River. And I mentioned right now I'm living in Ottawa, so the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. And I could say that, but it's also an act and a lesson for me down a journey of truth in particular and in reconciliation, and a slow one as I try to take on, for me, this is learning about how to see the world through new lenses and to ask myself questions and learn, and in particular unlearn in so many ways. And thank you again, Ali, for that presentation and that conversation. One of the first things, I came to Ottawa for grad school thinking I'd be here a year, and as I fast forward to many more years later, I'm the Gen X on the panel, okay? One of the projects that I had the privilege of doing a couple of years ago with some Indigenous colleagues, they had us talk in a circle at the beginning of our conversation about the privileges that each of us had and how we can learn to think about them and name them and recognize them in our own lives, and recognize them also as a way of naming challenges that those with us and in our communities face. And I think about the privileges I've had of formal and a lot of informal education, of a work experience with some really amazing peaks and some like really difficult bumps. I started my public service career after a little bit of time in the private sector and cared deeply about multilateral collaboration and did that for a while. Worked in some roles where I realized, okay, I wanted to focus in more on dialogue. And I would say that's my trade right now. I'm based at Treasury Board, as came up in the slides, but getting ready for my next free agent assignment as well. And out of that saying, okay, how can we collaborate in new and different ways? So many of the challenges that we face as humans and as public servants mean doing hard things together. Things that are practically hard, read pandemic, things that are hard as humans. We're seeing new kinds of gaps in how people are served or supported. We're seeing things that we can't unsee. And I asked them, well, who's the we are you on about here, Susan? But how do we support one another in whole new ways? If this is a pulling apart and putting it back together again, what do we want to be? And I think out of that, the first question of where I would look at around professionalism is, what's the work that you want to do in the world? And if you take it from there and you're bringing your whole self to it, I have some side hustles, you've seen that. And so what does it mean to do those thoughtfully and well? For me, spending some time in media means clearing things with values and ethics on one side. And I had worried like that would be terrifying. No, they're quite fans. And we just talk about Susan, the arts radio host, doesn't talk about policy. And honestly, I'm quite okay on Friday mornings or over the weekend when I'm indulging in my creative muse of keeping it very separate from my job. No problem there. But they're both part of the work I want to do in the world, and the skills and the interests and whatnot overlay. How do you want to add value? What do you feel your contribution is? And you're spot on about, we've heard both of the panelists that went before me here talked really thoughtfully about how to approach that and what shouldn't be a factor and what should be a factor. How do you stand as you? And then more specifically, who are you and what does that mean about how can you enable the people around you? How can you support them to be their best selves? And I think most particularly, how by naming things, either things that are hard for you, things that you're experiencing, things that are coming up in your world, by you naming it, by all of us naming things, it's an act of leadership by creating room for the colleague beside us as well, by strengths and by vulnerabilities, by asking the questions. I think like it's a little bit of a rambly place to start, but we have 10 minutes to go. I want to create room for other people's questions. And I think I would really come down to, what do you see our roles, our public service roles, our tools to support Canadians to build the best public service that we can be, to support ourselves as humans. So how are you doing that? And how, by you being your most you, can you do more of that? And how, in doing so, are you creating space and opportunity for others? And how are we creating that, and how are we listening that? I'll stop there.
Merci, Susan. Et donc, comme tu as noté, nous avons que 10 minutes qui nous restent. Alors, on va continuer avec les questions de nos participants. We'll just jump right to the audience. I had some questions that were put together by some great folks in the background, but your questions are better, audience members. And so I see one that has 9 votes, and hoping that our panelists have seen it as well. Donc, en français, c'est comment établir des limites avec les collègues et les responsables lorsqu'on l'impression que les limites ont déjà été dépassées. So how do we establish boundaries with colleagues and managers when it feels like the boundaries have already been crossed, or boundaries are realized as or after they are crossed? So maybe I can turn it around. And since Susan, I know you just had the mic, but I'll have you go first this time if you'd like to share some thoughts on that. And given we only have about 6-7 minutes, hopefully we can get to another question. But if Ali and Amanda, you want to ring in after Susan, feel free. And if you want to go on to the next one, we can jump to another question. Over to you, Susan.
Sure. I'm thinking of a baptism by fire, where in an in-person office environment, sometimes I'm a hugger. I had another colleague who was a hugger. We got reprimanded. I got reprimanded for hugging them. They were a subordinate, and it wasn't seen as professional on that particular team. I did change teams. There were a number of things going on there. And I think part of it is also to go back to, what if we feel like we've crossed a line, or we've gone through something very hard, like as we collectively all also have. I find myself, I'm stepping back and adding in more boundaries, partly to do what Amanda illustrated so well as work-life separation. My person is one person, but I'm finding I need to create separation for me right now. I love people as whole people, but I need to have a space in my mind and in my day where I want to hold. I'm finding more back. I'm less active on social media right now. And it's partly to create the time and the space. And I think for colleagues taking a step back, I mean, sometimes it's just take the step and don't worry about it. Sometimes it's saying, hello world, I need to take a step back and create a bit more space for me to be at my best. We're all works in progress, and we're all allowed to evolve how we move in the world. We go back to, by naming it, you're creating the space, and you're creating space for the next person who might be looking for ways as well.
Thanks, Susan. Amanda, Ali, anything you'd like to add on that?
Maybe we'll just pick on one thing really quickly, and what I love that Susan mentioned, and bringing your whole self to work doesn't mean that you can't still have boundaries. Like, I think that's really important. And so for me, being a mental health advocate, like taking a mental health day, ensuring that I'm not taking on too much, or maybe sharing too much if I'm comfortable or not comfortable, like it's really important to recognize that. Going back to the question specifically on like, what if the boundaries have been crossed? Like, how do you deal with that? I think it's just important to level set. And truthfully, in your teams, you should be doing that regularly. Like, just having a conversation, what's working, what's not working. In my team, I have an onboarding document. It's updated regularly. When we brought in a team lead, their roles are put in. What do they do? What do they don't do? I ask the question, what's working, what's not working. So I think it's important to kind of have that conversation regularly so that if there is a need to remind someone about a boundary or level set, that there's an opportunity to do so. And if it's not with you per se, like let's just say you're witnessing a boundary that just feels weird that it's being crossed on one side, that like you're not being, it's not working for you, or like this sometimes can translate into favoritism or things like that. Like it's important to be vocal to your boss to say, I'm noticing this is making me feel uncomfortable. I'm just wondering if as a team we can maybe level set. And your boss should, again, be asking the question so that you can ask that. But if you're not comfortable maybe having a verbal conversation like on Teams, drop them an email, send them a note, just be vocal about what's working and what's not working. And I think if it's a good manager, they'll take that to heart and make the change that's needed.
Thanks, Amanda. Ali, anything to add?
Yeah, if I could just jump in there, give another shout out to one of our grassroots networks. FlexGC has done some great work around team charters. I encourage people to check that out. And if you're in a leadership position, consider co-creating a team charter. This will allow the people on your team to kind of talk about how they like to be, how they like others to interact with them, and that's a great place for you to kind of put in your boundaries.
Absolutely. I think this is a nice segue to the other question that's been upvoted by our viewers at home, as we're all at home. So during the pandemic, I found my team has bonded over the challenges we faced over the last couple of years. I think all of our panelists, myself included, can agree with that. But at times I wonder if we or I have overshared and whether it may impact others' perception of our professionalism. Others, I imagine, could be, people you talk to about work or new colleagues who join the team. So any advice on how to balance this level of professionalism, particularly in a time where lots of folks are isolated and lack socialization? I'll leave it to you to raise your hand, maybe physically, and just if any of you have some thoughts you'd like to share.
I can jump in. I would say that there's a lot of talk about COVID. Like you can't tiptoe around it. We're living through it. I think for me, it's knowing when to talk about it and ensuring that there's opportunities to talk about it. So as a manager, I always ask the first question in our team is, how are you doing? I sent a note this morning before my team got online, post-storm check-in, how's everyone doing? So you give the opportunity for the discussion to happen. I think if you're talking about a work deliverable and there's no correlation and suddenly you just start offloading about the pandemic or things like that, there's a time and place for any type of conversation, whether it's pandemic related or something else. So I think it's just being mindful of when the conversation is happening. As managers, it's being mindful to have the conversation. I know I spoke to some teams and early on during the pandemic, they felt that they actually didn't have an avenue. And so they were feeling resentful to their management teams because they felt they were going through this experience and no one was asking them about how they were doing, how they were managing, especially when we talk about change management, which I work in. It's important to get that feedback from people. So I would say I wouldn't shy away from not sharing. If you feel like you need to share. Again, it's knowing your audience. So if it's being asked in a group, share. If you feel more comfortable just talking with your manager one-on-one, share. I know personally, the only person, if you saw me at the beginning, like looking around, the only person I have at home during the day is my dog. My husband doesn't work at home. And so I'm alone like not 24/7, but like 8 hours of the day for 5 days a week. And so I need to talk to someone. And sometimes I need that offloading myself to talk to my director general and just say, this is how I'm feeling, or I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed. I might not necessarily always have it with my team. If they ask me how I'm feeling, I'll be honest. But to know that I have someone that I also can turn to is really important. So I would say, know your audience, know the context, know where you're sharing. But definitely if you feel the need to share, I think it's really important to use your team to be able to find the right opportunities to do so.
Absolutely. And I think as we continue now to venture into this midway of, virtual and in person, the hybrid model, we're going to continue to understand that balance. And it's all about balance, I think, as you captured there, Amanda. Just keeping an eye on the clock. I guess c'est tout le temps qu'on a pour les questions aujourd'hui. Avant qu'on se quitte, nous avons un dernier élément que nous voulons vous présenter. Donc, the Federal Youth Network just launched the second episode of a new podcast today. The episode is a great follow-up to our session today on its focus, as it focuses on the topic of building your reputation remotely. Yeah, I think that really stems from a lot of what our panelists touched on today. It's definitely a discussion not to be missed with the English episode, Sidra Mahmoud, Sean Boots, and Brittany Lewis, and in the French episode, Jennifer Thorne, Véronique Aumont, et Catherine Leblanc. The episode is now available on Spotify and Apple Podcast, and you can find the link to the podcast in the chat. Donc, le balado est disponible dès maintenant sur Spotify et Apple Podcast, et vous pouvez trouver un lien vers le balado dans le chat. Abonnez-vous pour ne manquer pas des épisodes, and be sure to sign up for the next event. The links for the registration and resources for today's session are in the chat as well. Donc, a big thank you to the folks behind the scenes at the Federal Youth Network and to our panelists today. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Bonne journée tout le monde.